Buonasera a tutti, grazie di essere qui e benvenuti in Park Hub, che è il nostro spazio flessibile, questo spazio aperto diciamo, ai collaboratori dello studio, ma anche appunto a persone esterne. Dedichiamo la programmazione culturale appunto a eventi di vario tipo, sia di arte, di design, ma appunto anche un evento come quello di questa sera. In occasione appunto dell'Arc Week abbiamo deciso di presentare un progetto che è appunto Anatomy of Public Space, un progetto a cui Park Plus, la nostra cellula di ricerca, insieme a Transform Transport, la fondazione di ricerca di Systematica e Land Research Lab, appunto dello studio Land, hanno lavorato. È una pubblicazione, come si può intuire, di ricerca sullo spazio pubblico, che appunto viene raccontato attraverso 3 lenti di ricerca, quindi quella architettonica, paesaggistica e infine appunto quella di mobilità. Abbiamo deciso di raccontarlo con un talk che sarà appunto moderato da Luisa Bravo, che è curatrice del Museo dello Spazio Pubblico, e avremo anche appunto Matteo Arietti in rappresentanza di Park Plus, insieme a Lamia Abdel-Fattah e Zaineb Kadiri di Transform Transport e Andrea Balestrini e Giulia Castellazzi di Land. Il talk sarà in inglese perché la pubblicazione è in inglese e per facilitare anche gli ospiti che non sono di madrelingua italiana. Però sentitevi liberi appunto a fine del talk di fare domande anche in italiano. Infine ci sarà un piccolo rinfresco fuori e niente, vi lascio al talk. Grazie. Scusate.
Can hear us, we can go without the microphone.
No,
better with the microphone.
I was joking.
Okay. All right. Hi, everyone. So I'm just going to start by giving you a bit of a background as to how this book came to life. So it started when Andrea Balestrini and Andrea Gorini were at a conference, and they started talking about like something where they could join forces and have an impactful project about something that is in common between the entities. And then they involved Matteo here. And so something we have in common is the public realm. And we thought it would be interesting to narrate the public realm and also its role in the contemporary cities differently. So we started like brainstorming and having multiple brainstorming sessions, and we decided it would be quite interesting to have this analogy with the human body. Also from a communications perspective, I'm the communications manager here at TT, at Transform Transport. We thought it could be nice to reach a broader audience. So what we did is we took this analogy, and then each organization, so the mobility experts, the architect experts, and then the landscape design experts, started to sort of identify different components of the public space. And each of us separately decided to identify what could be a good analogy with the human body, and why we thought it could be interesting to really highlight the fact that the public space at the end of the day is a living organism, and also it's an adaptive system. So we wanted to really stress on the fact that yes, it's going to be an adaptive system. There's going to be a lot of interconnected components in it, and we really wanted to highlight this. And Also, well, obviously, it's important to stress that this book is only going to be a starting point where we're going to be where we're presenting some budding ideas that we would love to explore further at a later stage with all of you. And now I'll let you and I'll discuss further the different chapters and the different components with the team. Thank you.
So I have this task to start breaking the ice. Thank you for coming. I'm very happy to be here and to moderate this event. My name is Luisa Bravo, and I am the founder and curator of Museo Spazio Pubblico in Bologna. It's very nice for me to be here and to talk with all of you regarding public space, since I've been working more than 10 years, probably more than 15 years now, on promoting public space culture. So it's a very important shift. Public space is not just a physical space, but it is mostly a concept, a culture. So we assume as Italians that we all have this public space culture. But then if we go out and leave our cities, our suburban contexts, we actually see that public space doesn't really exist. Because in our mind, we have this idea of public space, which is what I call postcard public space. So a lot of stereotypes. If I ask you, think about, in your mind, a public space in Milan, what is the first image that comes to your mind? Don't answer, don't tell me. But this is a very interesting exercise. Do people think about a closed garden next to the place where they live? Do they think about a vibrant street in their neighborhood? Do they think about a park next to the place where they live, where they meet friends and go there with parents, you know, to spend some time? Most of the times, the first image that comes to mind is the main square of the city. You know, Piazza Maggiore in Bologna, Piazza Duomo in Milan, because we have this preconceived idea of what public space is. Well, actually, nowadays, the public space is a very complex structure, and public space exists even when it doesn't exist. This can be a paradox, but it is very important to understand that public space is everywhere, around us. Every day we cross public space in multiple ways. And public space belongs to our subjective experience of the urban environment, we as human beings. So that's why this book actually is very important, because it's highlighting the fact that urban environments are primarily human environments. And so maybe you have heard already that we design cities for people and all these very nice slogans. Yes, but what does it mean? I mean, it's something that we can repeat, and we can agree that, yes, we design cities for people. Yes, but how? Because I think now the most important translation that we need to do is to move from theoretical knowledge into actions, implementation, effective implementation, something that has an impact on human beings in their own environments. How do we create public spaces, better public spaces for people living in cities? So this is the challenge, because we all agree, I guess, that public space is important, is a key asset for sustainable development. Public space can improve physical and mental health, is good for social cohesion, creates a sense of belonging and civic identity. I can continue and say how many good things the public space can bring to a city, to a neighborhood. But how do we do this? So this book is actually introducing this metaphor that public space can be associated to the human body. And the human body has a layered complexity in the same way public space in its complexity is actually bringing us so many challenges. The way we understand it, the way we approach it, the way we observe it, and the way we design it. Public space is not just about design. This is very important, even if here now I'm with designers. But, you know, when we talk about human environments, public space is also appropriation, you know, sense of identity, its culture, you know, and can we design this? So it's very important when we talk about public space to shift, as I said, to the concept of public space and to understand that we need to develop a certain culture around the public space, which means multidisciplinary effort, because it's not just about design. And also the fact that you are continuously learning while you work on public space, because it's an ever-changing system. I like to say that public space is a social infrastructure. So as an infrastructure, also engineers, for example, I'm an engineer, should be engaged in the design of public space because it is related to so many systems that you cannot actually think about public space just as a small square or a small garden. Yes, we need to do that as well, but to have a very strong and bold concept of public space means that you have to consider public space as an infrastructure. I've been working since 2016 with the Global Public Space Program at UN Habitat, and recently UN Habitat published 2 reports on city-wide public space strategies. And this book is approaching the concept of public space from this same perspective. So it's not about mobility and public space. It's not about architecture and public space. It's not about landscape design and public space. It's about public space and mobility, architecture, landscape design, environmental issues, and many other things. So what if we reverse the concept? What if we start from public space? What if we design an approach to urban complexity that is highlighting public space as the key component? So those are all, provocations for the speakers and for the audience. I also wrote about this in the preface of the book. In the preface, I also encourage this new mindset related to public space by providing a perspective which is related to human environments. And the fact that if you want to be a good public space designer, you need to embrace this new humanism idea of what cities can be, of what public space can be, because there is an embedded, very strong potential in our cities and public spaces that we need to see and unfold in a very powerful way. I don't want to be too long because I will moderate and ask questions to the speakers and to you as well. I would like to start now to go into contents of the book. The book is divided in several chapters. describing components of public space in relation to the human body. So the first chapter is on streets as the brain of the human body. So, Lamia.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Luisa. As already has been said, the book is one of the main things that we wanted to do with the book is to approach it with like a polyvocality. So as three different disciplines that all work on public space. So we have the architect, the landscape designer, and the mobility planner. And what we did is we identified, like we predefined typologies of public space, and we decided together which metaphor works best for each space. So we agreed together on this, and then it was very interesting to see how our different perspectives came about through each metaphor. The first metaphor, let's say, is about streets and the brains. On the surface, streets don't seem like they are part of the public space for many people. Maybe for mobility planners, it's the prime public space. So we also had like varying interest in this particular space. For the architect, it's very much a background entity. That is seen as kind of also in relation to the brain as something that is not to be touched and is scary, and we don't want to change it. We don't want to do anything about it that would somehow shift something in the system. And this is very similar to how we see the brain as well. So the idea that this is a complex system that works as a totality, and if you change one part of it, you affect every other part of it. Has been like a constant narrative in this chapter. Also, from a mobility perspective, the idea that of neuroplasticity, which we borrow from the world of psychology. We know that that the human brain, that neural pathways in the brain are capable of adapting themselves. So we know this already from the branch of neuroscience, that if people have certain behaviors and are able to change them, then the neural pathways within the brain actually change along with it. And so we question this idea of, can we apply the same concept to our streets? Can the streets of our city have a kind of neuroplasticity where they are able to transform and adapt according to changing needs of the city, of the environment? And this obviously, of course, brings us back to the moment of COVID, when we saw how, even if at a much slower pace, but some streets were converted entirely to the use of people and pedestrians and cyclists. And this is a miniature version, let's say, of this plasticity, and it showed us a moment in which also some of these interventions were maintained on the long term as well. So this made these budding changes into something more permanent. We talk a lot about how the brain structure is also similar to that of the street structure in the city, and how there are many lessons to be learned from moving from one system to the other. Yeah. Sorry.
Thank you. We move to parks.
Yeah, so of course, I'm talking about parks as a landscape planner, but I'm also very enthusiastic of talking about parks, because I think that green areas are well accepted by people because of many reasons, because they have also an ornamental value in the history of European cities, but also American cities. So they have a component that is much linked with the emotional part of people. And we got aware that we also need parks in cities because our climate is changing, and because we need a protection from the challenges that are is interfering with my phone, maybe? I don't know. I feel... So we need a protection against the challenges that climate is posing to our society and also to ourselves as citizens. So basically, the metaphor with the lungs, it's quite obvious because parks are providing clean oxygen and they are absorbing carbon dioxide as our lungs are purifying the blood and are allowing the life of our body. So the park in the same way is providing clean energy to the city, but is also allowing the city to live because they host people in the shade, they host animals and plants, they host life in general, and they are also a non-conventional public space because maybe they are not the first idea of public space that commonly people have. But in some cultures, such as in China, the park is a place where you can do whatever you want. You do Tai Chi, you practice yoga, you meet with the neighbors to play chess. So basically, the green area is conceived as an extension of your private space and a place where you can really socialize without boundaries. And this is also a very important value that we wanted to bring in the publication, that green areas and in general public space has no boundaries and should become really an integrative part of the city ecosystem because of this public essence that characterize open space.
So back to Lamia for squares as the heart of the human body.
Yes. So again, this metaphor is quite obvious, the square as the heart of the public space. But for me, also like reading through our three contributions, what I think is very interesting is how we discuss whether squares are still the heart of public life. So not about public space per se. If we speak about public space, also from a mobility perspective, I can easily say yes, all streets, all roads lead to the public space as an entity. But public life is shifting now, and it's not just shifting indoors or shifting in private spaces, but also shifting online and shifting virtually. So this, I think, is an interesting concept, a more radical concept of understanding what the square is a heart of, really, and whether we should move back and try to restore the public square as really the heart of public life and where things happen. I'll leave this idea up for discussion maybe later on, but I felt that this was an interesting connection. Also, we discussed the idea of the heart being, so the health of the heart really depends on the health of all the streets leading up to it. In the case of the heart, all the veins and the arteries. And in the same way, from a mobility perspective, what we always try to do is that we study how people move in the city, how cars, how all different modes move in the city to reach the public square. There's also the sub-discussion of how we want to obviously redirect the public squares to people and ensure that streets also are facilitators for people to move and not just cars and so on. And so using also innovative ICT infrastructure, what we're able to do is that we're able to now track more than ever before how people move in the city and how the patterns change throughout the day, throughout the year, different seasons, according to the weather, according to the different destination points around the public space. So it's not just obviously about the space itself and how people get there, but what types of attractions, what types of generators of activity exist around it, which is when we move to buildings will be the the main component. But this is these are the main topics of discussion that we put forth.
Yeah, actually, the square topic is really like in the conception of the book was very related to the buildings one, because the buildings chapter, it's actually like at the beginning was like the ghost chapter, because it was difficult to fit this one in the discourse of public spaces. But finally, we decided to go for it. And we decided to do this after a discussion about the Boburg and what this building has done for the whole square in the Marais. And after that, it was tough as well to find an actual an analogy with the human body. So we went for the skins because it has a, let's say, you can give it to the skin like a double kind of intention, I would say. So it's both something that it's the facade, the appearance of a body, and it's also a thermal regulation system. So when we decided to speak about buildings, we were kind of flipping the discourse about buildings not to be that important for public space, by giving them like the main role of activation of public space itself. Of course, it's not just like that. It's kind of an oversimplified maybe reading, but we stated that the true activators of the city are the buildings in some way, because they contain all the functions that basically keep like the public space vibrant and active. And to connect this topic with the parks as well, we started thinking about how it could be interesting to get nature getting into the buildings itself, maybe not just with green roofs or green facades, or like some sort of tools that are attached to the buildings, so attached to the skin. But we thought about like making this nature-based solution crawling under the skin to get inside the building, and make the building itself becoming some sort of a biophilic design tool to be a new kind of let's say, yeah, to kickstart a new frontier on how you actually intend architecture and building itself.
Okay, so you also address the voids, or you want to say something more?
I will go for the voids directly. Okay. So voids again was kind of a strange topic. We find a very like trivial analogy with the human body, that was guts. So at a certain point we were going for guts, but we decided to find a more poetic analogy. So we decided to go for uterus, which is also like a more on point analogy. So we decided to go for uterus because it's something that gives birth, and basically we decided to go for this analogy because voids in cities could be problems, but could also be a very strong opportunity, and we are seeing it nowadays. So voids are kind of at the forefront of the expansion of new city in a way. So if at the beginning were kind of spaces that were leftovers after like more savage kind of expansions, nowadays we are trying to keep voids back into the system and find a way to actually squeeze value out of them. So I think that even if it's not like, even if voids are not filled with buildings itself, but remain kind of more thoughtful voids in a way. So maybe like natural voids or public voids like squares, but they're very active into pumping new life in the city itself and giving new occasions to the people to actually live the city in a better way.
And finally, we have liminals. Thank you.
So okay. So before Luisa was talking about what we identify as public space as first thought of. and she was mentioning Piazza Duomo or Piazza Maggiore in Bologna. But we think also that it's really important to talk about liminal spaces, because they can, in our vision, they can really become an important material of composition for the city of the future. Indeed, the analogy that we found with the anatomy of public space is with the vestigial organs, since we have these organs that lost their function through the process of evolution. And it happened the same with these liminal spaces, since these vacant plots and undefined spaces and neglected areas now are there just waiting for a sort of a new life. So that's why we found this analogy with these vestigial organs, and also more in particular with the appendix, since we do not know that we have it until it hurts or it gets inflamed. So it happens a bit the same with the liminals. So we were thinking, what can these liminals become in this city of the future that we are imagining together? And for example, we had different ideas. So they can be like renaturing occasions, also to create buffer zones for infrastructure, for example. Or they can be like areas to manage water, to implement sustainable drainage. They are also a very important hotspot for biodiversity, for example, because if we leave just a vacant plot, maybe nature reconquers it and takes it again, takes possession of those areas and reflourish again. So this is a bit the analogy that we found, and also it's very important to work all together with also different disciplines to also avoid that the new projects create these liminal spaces, even though sometimes it happens something interesting, so different meanwhile uses that develop over time. So this is a bit the input from the landscape point of view.
Thank you. We want to say something?
Yeah, about the liminals, maybe. Yeah, actually, we are missing a designer, and maybe the liminals is the topic that could be treated by an actual designer, because it's a smaller scale. And the very interesting thing is that you can go, at least in my opinion, with a very pop-like approach when you treat liminals, in order to have this kind of spaces that are more like acupuncture spaces that can ease tension in let's say environments that are kind of aching, let's say. And also in this case, we have a lot of examples here in Milan of liminal spaces that are treated in a very interesting way and can change completely the appearance of an entire neighborhood when they are decline in a more interesting way.
So thank you for presenting contents of the book. So now maybe we start a conversation with some few questions. We didn't predefine the questions with the speakers, so I will be spontaneous here. Okay, so something that I wrote in my preface is that on the 1st of August 2022, the General Assembly of the United Nations adopted an historical resolution stating for the first time, intended as a right for all, not just a privilege for some. And this also is a very, very important statement, and all of us are called into this very important commitment, since we are designers, and we shape the urban environment. So this is a question for all the speakers. In your opinion, for the work that you do, what is the level of awareness for different stakeholders that are engaged in the process of creating, shaping urban environments, and then, of course, successful public spaces? What is the level of awareness that clean, healthy environment is a human right? I mean, this is very bold. I don't know if you understand this as a very wow. And while we were on vacation, the United Nations in August just released this resolution. I was, wow, nobody was talking about this. But I mean, it was super important. And probably sometimes there is a certain criticism, just for you answer. But you have to consider that the effort in relation to sustainable urbanization, sustainable development, is coming from global commitments that are then coming down to earth and reaching our municipalities and our neighborhoods. So what it is stated from all member states at the United Nations, 193 member states at the United Nations, which is a resolution, then we later, arrive at our cities and politicians and policymakers and public officers and stakeholders. So at some point, we need to come to terms to this idea that clean, healthy environments are a human right. But what is the level of awareness in Italy, in Milan, with all the people that you have been working so far?
So I feel the question is addressed to me. Well, I will start a bit far away, recalling that a few years ago, New Zealand introduced the rights of rivers. So I think what is a subtle message of this publication is also that no perspective should be given for granted in the way we perceive and we design the city, because we have been used to perceive and design the city in a certain way, and we inherited a conception of public space that maybe is not the most inclusive one and is not the most sustainable one, is not the most attractive one. And so, first of all, I think we should subvert also and make relative our opinion of public space, because I'm pretty sure with the diversity of stakeholders we have nowadays in the public space, I'm not talking only about people from different cultures, but also people from different backgrounds and non-human stakeholders that are also part of our society. We should really ask ourselves if even our perception and our awareness of public space is complete enough. And answering your question, we have, of course, different levels of awareness. Of course, if we are talking about a client who wants to build a new urban development, even though we have good examples in Milan where the private initiative is providing a benefits for the public utility, building a square or a place that will be publicly used, or she has a different opinion of public space in comparison to the mother with the kids that is going there to spend the afternoon, or a couple of elderly people going there in the morning in summer to look for some shelter, or even two teenagers who want to skateboarding somewhere. So you might have noticed that many private public spaces in Milan do not have benches or other devices to avoid these not welcomed behaviors. So, of course, it depends on the cultural backgrounds. You have mentioned the culture of public space, and like landscape, also public space has a quite strong cultural component that is influencing the choices of city makers, but also the behavior of users of this space. The key assumption that we are making in the booklet, that public space is free because it's public, I think opens a huge variety of uses that you can do there. And it's also the place where you can express yourself without boundaries. This is the advantage of having public spaces in the city, because regardless of who built it, who is managing it, or which is the ruling party of your country, in the public space, you are free to be yourself. And this is also an important component that I think many target groups realize and so are aware of it. And that's why there is also a culture of public space, maybe not in the city making level enough, but still in the people.
Anyone?
Sure. I'll maybe shift the idea a bit from the idea of public space as a right to everyone in the city to public space as a right to everyone living in it, meaning in different neighborhoods. So something else we focus on a lot is okay, we know Milano has public spaces, that's great, but how are they really distributed among the city and who gets to benefit from them on a day-to-day basis? And so, yes, I think this idea of the right to public space from the outset sometimes masks the differences between different neighborhoods. And with this talk being, with this event of Arc Week being also about peripheries, this is an even more pressing issue. So yes, I think the awareness, there is somewhat, I guess, it's given that there's this awareness that, yes, of course, we have a right to public space. But sometimes when you start to live in a neighborhood, you realize, okay, but really, if I want to get to a decent park that's not just like a corner of a street or something, or somewhere for my children to play, I have to do a bigger effort to reach that place or to make sure that I'm safe there or that I'm welcome, depending on my background, depending on the cultural context. So yeah, just to add this, maybe I added to the question rather than responded to it.
So it's interesting because you introduced the several concepts like accessibility now, inclusion, that are extremely relevant. Accessibility in particular is a prerequisite for public space, because if it is not accessible, but sometimes we do not think about accessibility as one of the major components when we design public accessibility. Means in terms of mobility, in terms of walkability, but also in terms of welcoming, presence of people in public space. And this means cultural diversity and possibilities to express yourself, which is very, very important. But you also mentioned, not clearly, but I understood you were mentioning hostile architecture that we always see in public space, and the removal of benches, not for unwanted behaviors, but for unwanted people. Yes. So when we talk about public space, we have to consider that public space is not always nice, beautiful. It's not a fairy tale. Public space is about the divisions, conflicts, and people fighting, right? We saw this recently, strongly, in Italy, in Europe, in the US. And so public space also becomes a space for democracy and civil rights. So that's why this reference to public space as a human right is extremely relevant. And that's why I said public space is not just about design. So I recently wrote a thematic paper on cities and human settlements with quality public spaces for the global platform for the right to the city, based in Brazil. And there is a completely, new idea of what public space means in terms of rights, which is, again, still very strong, very bold, that in a way, I think, should also inform design activities. Also in, brainstorming sessions and a way of inviting stakeholders to come and talk about public space before designing. Because when we say we design cities for people, again, this slogan, and probably another one you have heard already, like first space, the first life, then space, then buildings. The other way around never works. This is also very nice to cite, when we are talking about public space. Yes, but we need to be aware that in our mindset, anytime we design public space, we are actually excluding something or someone because of our mental constraints, right? It's part of our human nature. It's not something that we do intentionally. It comes from the subconscious way. We think about cities and public spaces. And so that's why I said also we need to overcome these stereotype images that we have as a pre-idea of what public space is. And so that's why I think it is very important having a book like this from designers that are challenging, public space, which is not a static concept, but it's very dynamic, really evolving into many different meanings and overlapping layers. So another question for all of you. How much public space do you see in public policies? When you design public space, would you like to see more in terms of public support, public facilitation, public participation that is aiming for more successful silos, talk with the majority of stakeholders that we can go on site, take people and talk about public space, because this is not something you can do in your office. Sorry to say this, but you need to really challenge yourself, and all of you as well. I'm always talking at you, but actually it's for all of you, and for all of you, because this is your mission. I mean, I'm talking about myself, but I don't know. I'm assuming that everyone that is on public space has this kind of disruptive, And I've been in conflict with the municipality of Bologna, for example, because of very, impossible way of considering, public space without no creative approach, without no innovation, without no experimental, everything is about rules, bureaucracy, standards, but instead the public space is calling for exactly the opposite, something that you can do also spontaneously because you love a space next to the place where you live, because you want to have a party, with your friends and relatives, and because the public space is also temporary. It can be temporary, not permanent. So public space in some neighborhoods is appearing, disappearing, reappearing, pop-up installations, events, opportunities. So we have to come to terms with something that, also is part of a subjective, like a human body that has some needs at certain points and is looking for some gratification. I don't know. What do you think?
I'm thinking a lot of things, so I try to condensate in one answer. I think we have mentioned three highlighting words. I hope to remember all of them. One was temporary, and this is a direct experience that we have done, that we are doing in our research lab with the European projects that are exploring the world of minimal uses in public space. And this is something that was groundbreaking for us, because we were used as many designers to have a client with specific needs, and among those needs or requirements, there is not usually a participatory process or a temporary use. And this was something really new for us, and that is also new in the European panorama in general. It's very important to not over-design public space, because as we said before, we cannot assume to know everything about the needs of people and non-human stakeholders, but also some spontaneity in the public space is actually the best learning for us designers. I don't know if you have a park around the corner of your neighborhood where you observe that there is a straight path and then there is another direct path that is designed by people walking in the grass. So that's the mistake of designers. This is not the mistake of people using another way. So this is maybe a first the user experience. So this is a first assumption. Then inclusion, style architecture. No, you were talking and I was thinking many things, but now I forgot. Well, one aspect was the topic of the topic of public policies was the third, and the second one was about the role of designers. No, so we see that in many public spaces of the city there are some functions that have been designed because we have a certain culture or because the public administration has a certain standards to do things. But on the other hand, we should also conceive public spaces as non-extraordinary spaces. So it means that not only a square is a public space, but also the footpath in front of your door or the liminal that is behind the corner. So this is a place that deserves the name of public space, even though it's not hosting a noble function. Maybe it's just a place where your neighbor is bringing the dog, or where the other neighbor is organizing a barbecue on Sunday because they don't have a balcony that is big enough. So this is also expecting the unexpected in the public space. And the third thing, thank you to remind me, was the public policies. So there is an openness in Milan, maybe also in Italy, that is not corresponded by flexibility and standards. So maybe in Milan you have amazing policies such as strade aperte and piazze aperte, but then when piazze aperte and strade aperte becomes not anymore temporary but permanent, they design it as they did 20 years ago. So of course it's better to have a public space where before you had a crossroads. But still, you could have done it better, not only you city, but also you designer, because you need to subvert also the priority of users. So maybe we don't need all these asphalts in the city. We have huge footpaths in Milan. If you compare it to other big cities, you have huge quantities of huge surfaces of asphalt that we don't need, and this could be something else. Also to do some different functions.
Yeah, I wanted to stress the accent on this thing that Andrea was saying is that I think that policymakers are kind of going in the right direction with the attention on public spaces. And I think they're doing the effort to, let's say, think about public space as something different and more innovative in a way. And I think that they're declining this topic in a braver way than they're doing with sustainability, for example. So in my opinion, public space has done like huge step forwards and sustainability is kind of in the background in a way. But the very difficult thing for designers and for the citizens, people to accept is the rate of change in a way. So they're not fast enough. That's because of standards, and a lot of times, designers are kind of stuck in this limbo where you have thought about a project which is very interesting, and the clients are happy about it, but in some way it takes like 5 years, 6 years to get it done in some sort of way, and sometimes it's not even close to what you have to think about in the very beginning. So, but I think that the topic is on the table, and in my personal opinion, in a very neat and clear and interesting way. I don't think in Italy, I think in Milan in some sort of way. But maybe it's it's just my opinion in some way.
I don't have something particular to add. I mean, I got a lot of ideas from when everyone was talking, but I think that the idea of public space being different, like just even speaking of like the designers, we're 3 different types of designers, and we even approaching this book, we had different ideas of what public space is. So part of the problem is also defining what we mean by public space, because it's a prerequisite to designing it. It's a prerequisite to understanding how to deal with it, how to study it, everything. So I think this book was an opportunity for us to like sit at the table with 3 different lenses and say, okay, but what is it really? And for me, for me as someone who's focusing on mobility, I'm thinking of the sidewalk, I'm thinking of the street, I'm thinking of very particular things. Whereas for an architect, maybe these are things that don't exist or some or like are beyond the borders of maybe tell me if, if I'm wrong. So I think the definition of public space is a big part of it. And the idea of bringing in the metaphor of the human body and the human anatomy into this exercise was to kind of push the envelope. So it's an arbitrary connection. It's not something that we had to do to create this metaphor and see how things connect, but it forced us to step outside of our zones, to step outside of our minds and of ourselves, and to see, okay, so what connections can we make? What relationships and even symbolisms can we learn from a different discipline altogether and see how it connects to the public space? And I think this was maybe the most interesting part of our discussions making this book, is really thinking about how when we force ourselves to say, okay, you know what, the void is the uterus, or the the liminal space is the appendix, what does this really mean? Like, for example, if we're talking about liminal spaces, we each took a different approach. The appendix was from one point of view seen as like something that could blow up at any second, or there's a potential for harm. From a different point of view, it was seen as a threshold between past and present, and like an in-between space. And from the third point of view, it was what we focused on was the idea that it's a reservoir, like a part of the immunity system. So liminal spaces are a reservoir for flows and fluxes of people moving into the city. And so when there's a emergency situation, these spaces, even though they don't exist when you first think of them, they actually have a very strong role in diffusing a situation of an emergency situation. So yeah, just this idea of coming together, even if we're just, even if it's just the designer point of view, but really trying to combine different perspectives to try to come up with a different animal, let's say, of what public space is.
Anyone else?
I connect more with what you said at the beginning about more policies, and I think it's also a bit our job to try to change and to improve the policies that the municipality applies, and the standards and the rules. So, for example, I think it's always a bit hard when we talk about parking lots that are really conquering our public space and are really eating our space. And but I think that it's always controversial talking about this. But maybe if we show the benefits, the real benefits, that, for example, a tree line instead of a line of parking can bring to our neighborhoods, but also to the quality of the air of the city, or to the buildings around it, or the quality of the city in general. I think that maybe showing these to municipality, but also to citizens, can really maybe improve and do something to trying to improve the quality of life and standards and rules that we have to overcome sometimes.
I just wanted to add another notion that we briefly spoke about. It's the fact, the participatory approach to urban planning, and basically, like, what came to my mind is it would be interesting to empower people more, and so to so that also by empowering people, this would also influence the policies about it. And right now I have like 2 projects that we are currently like undertaking that came to mind, and that's a great example. There are 2 examples of like how they can influence the municipality. For example, we worked on recently on this first school square in Bologna. Like, so it's a little square outside of a school that allows students to just like either walk by it, or even like play around. Or but the point is, when they were building this little temporary square, they invited everyone to participate in it. So it kind of gave a sense of people, okay, this, you have the right to improve, to have like a great city and to have a sustainable city, but you are also empowered to participate in it. And another example that came to my mind is we're working in this project, which is about walkability for women. And one of our partners actually has developed this application where people and especially women are invited to contribute to this app. And it's about Milan, actually, and about mapping Milan. And people are invited to comment about their experience in the streets. It's more focused about the streets and walkability, but it's quite interesting to me to empower people to contribute. I think this could also help influence policies.
I just wanted to add one thing, because you said empowering people, and you, Matteo, said that in Italy there is a certain openness to public space, above all in Milan, but in general should be improved anyway. Maybe a key aspect is also the care of the public space, not only which is the owner or who is maintaining the public space, but also the care that people dedicate to the public space. And this is again about culture. I think one of the major differences between public spaces in Italy and in other countries, beyond the fact that in other countries the city makers have an open mind and are more prone to conceive public spaces in an innovative way, is that there is a care of the public realm that quite often we don't have here. So this is also, behaviorally, culturally. So this is, I think, one of the major threats that we have in Italy for public space, because if people do not care for their own city, it's hard that a good design or an enlightened administration can bring the change.
Yes, but your design can influence behavior and can create that cultural mindset that we need, because, public means that belongs to everyone, so to no one. So why do I have to care about something that someone else is, destroying, putting garbage, So why I am supposed to be, there to protect, maintain, and care, when others are not doing this. This is a problem of appropriation and belongings and identity. And you are right. I think you are right. We do not have such culture, for public space. But I think you touched a lot of very interesting topics. You talked about, just to sum up, and then we will open the discussion with the audience. You talked about the celebration of everyday public space. So celebration of the ordinary, because public space is not always the extraordinary, Piazza Duomo, but it's the street and the garden and the small square next to the place where we live. And there is a very established concept, which is everyday urbanism in the United States. which is actually addressing these everyday component that belongs to our daily routines, you know, when we discover public space. And you also talked about openness to avoid over-design. And this is a concept that Richard Sennett also is addressing a lot. I mean, openness means to give space to unexpected, spontaneous transformation of public space, because you do not control with your design. You give space for others to appropriate the space. And you also mentioned that public space is about the quality of life. Yes, it's so obvious, but then we miss, you know, the link that quality of life means human beings, you know, and who is in charge of this quality of life. So this is collective effort again. I'm coming to you again. And also, you talked a lot about how to redefine public space, because probably we all have a definition on public space, but actually we should continuously redefine public space. And I've been into this for so many years. Now, every time I have an activity, an event, whatever, you know, you won't believe that, but the most asked question that I receive from people is, what is public space? You know, every time you have to provide a different answer according to who is asking this question. So it's extremely important. And then you talked about public policies. Yes, extremely relevant. We need that kind of innovation, and to push policymakers, I think they should take a school on how to be innovative, you know, for public policies. And I know if, I don't know if you heard about this creative bureaucracy festival that is taking place in Germany. Now there are already several editions, and it is a moment for public officers and policymakers to think creatively. Because, I mean, we need this kind of expertise, you know, from people that are leading and that are creating, you know, all these kind of regulations and structures when we have to fit, you know, anytime we have to design public space. And then empowerment. Empowerment is key, but there is something which is risky in terms of empowerment. And this is also some of the key challenges for politicians and policymakers. When you want to empower others, you really need to give them power, right? It's not just come and talk and then we go back to the office and we do our regulation. No, empower means giving power, means that when I sit at the table with you, you are listening and I'm co-creating the regulation that will later give me the opportunity to do something. And so this is crucial because, you know, cities and politicians do not want to give power to others because they are giving responsibility, but they are also losing control. So empowering communities, which is the key element of what public space can be, is actually not happening, sadly. But we are all very strong advocates for public space, and we can push, you know, local governments, political leaders to do more for us. Because public space is about us, each one of us sitting in our room. So when I say public space is us, it's not the design, sorry. Mm-hmm. It's us. I think this is very important, that we understand the power that we have, we already have, but we don't use, right, to reclaim what can be a right for us. Okay, sorry, this is my activist part. Sorry. I'm also a designer, I have to say. So But I always try to, when I'm these public meetings, I always try to give this energy, you know, so that when you go back home tonight, you will think about this crazy lady that was talking about all this kind of stuff at the event. So now it's time for you to ask questions to this amazing panel of speakers, and difficult questions, please.
No, I don't express opinions because actually I've been kind of involved in the making of the book. And I can only tell that the first time I was really happy to be in such a nice group. Calls were actually really exciting because I think what people don't know, the effort you made actually behind all this. And I think that is a very important step you did, because ganging up is exactly what she means. And we have to do this. And you did it really well. And I guess that this kind of publication needs to be really shown to everybody, because what I experience, I'm not an architect, I'm not a designer, I'm just nobody. I'm just working as a communications person. What I really need, and also what I see the need, is that people need to understand what you already said. This is a booklet that makes this kind of comparison that is so useful, because if you have to talk to Show Maria, you need to find a nice analogy. You have to explain it. What's about public space? And I think that's a really wonderful thing that you did here. And I really hope you can bring it around, not only in Italy, because I think it's really well done. And we need more about these, more initiatives like that you talk, like also you, Luisa, you did it so nicely. I think it's really compelling that people understand that we have the power to the people. And I think that's very political. And we should also not be afraid, because design is a political act. And this is what you did, guys. And I really I'm so happy about this. And yeah, I hope you read this book, because you should read it. Because it's they're not only coming here, having fun, it's good, but you have to read it. And I think you can learn a lot. And I'm really happy to be here, and compliments.
Thank you. Someone else? Don't be shy. Yes, can you come closer, please? Yes.
Thank you. I had a question about something maybe related to policy. I'm a student of landscape architecture, and I'm working on understanding some of the areas of the city. And I realized that many parks are closed at night. And if I want to be more accurate, I guess in 4 neighborhoods or 5 neighborhoods of Afori, Dergano, Quarto Giaro, Bovisa and Bovisaska, almost 50% of them are closed at night. So when we are talking about public space being a right, who's taking that right from us? And as designers, shouldn't we advocate for more openness in the public space? Although there are arguments against it, for example, security or maintenance, but aren't those things small risks comparing to the bigger benefits that we may get? Thank you.
Not me. No, I'll say one thing and then I'll leave it to someone else. But to not be able to close the park, you first have to not have a gate and not have a fence. This is essential because we deal a lot with the issue of safety. And if it's a closed space and it has a wall, then this already has a lot of implications on safety. And the idea of the project that Zainab was mentioning, working on the mobility of women in the city, this is very important. The idea that if you have strong barriers, then what happens at night? If it's not closed, you can't really control this. And there are lots of studies about the type of problems that happen around parks, which are very vibrant places in the morning, but then at night they become something completely different, almost almost a negative space. But anyway, I let the park experts talk more about it.
I was thinking the same. I mean, if we talk again about different perspectives or perceptions, maybe having an open park at night is not safe for many other target groups I mean, for you as a student, it's amazing. You go there, you drink a bottle and whatever. But for a woman going home at night and the park is not well activated or lightened, of course, it's a matter of negotiation. I think you are very right when you say we haven't balanced the benefits of keeping the park open and the contra we have keeping the park closed and preserving the safeness of the park. So it's not an answer. Mine is not an answer. I think we should also balance, on the other hand, the freedom and the rights of people to feel safe. And again, we are on the cultural level. So maybe if the park is in Sweden, you feel safe. Here, I don't know, because you're not even safe in front of the main station in the sunlight. So I understand if someone don't feel safe walking alone in the park at night, or don't feel safe to bring the baby in the morning after something happened during the night in the same park. So it's basically our own fault, not as designers or citizens, but as user. I mean, we are diverse and not everybody has the same care of the public space. Again.
I would add this experience that I had in March in Bergamo, where I live, at Parco della Trucca. They opened this new park as a memorial for COVID deaths during the last years. And we went there with the project, with the people who designed this space, with the citizens that made some donations to plant those trees to make this area of the park this memorial. And the concern of those people giving this money to build this park was that they wanted to really close this park because they were afraid that people in the night would damage the furniture, the plants, or whatever. So sometimes it also comes directly from citizens. They were really, really concerned. And also the designer was replying, I don't see anyone coming here to damage a memorial with this important symbolic meaning. So at the end, it was not closed, but I really remember those people really complaining and continuing to asking to put these gates and these fences around. And also for me, it was kind of strange because I really see no point to damage a place like that. But it's really a concern of citizens sometimes, maybe not only policies.
Can you come?
Can I stand here so I can face everyone? Thank you. So I'm an architect. My experience is quite short, actually. I'm living in Italy for quite some years. But I'm working in a studio of architecture and urbanism in Bologna for the last 3 years. And actually, all of the projects that I've seen, or most of the projects that I've seen, they don't merge quite well the efforts that you managed to merge into this booklet, which is actually amazing and hilarious. I really hope that this could happen in projects. My question is, what do you think happens, or what do you think could help that this merging of multidisciplinary professions could happen and make a project more fruitful than it is, at least in Italy? Because this is my experience, I repeat.
I think these situations, because our collaboration kickstarted like that. So basically, we do have an initiative that is called Park Stage, where we invite guests to have lectures. Sometimes they are coming from other backgrounds. And Andrea Guarrini from TT came here last year to have this Park Stage for us. It was like a close event just for the people working here at Park Associati. And by seeing his lecture and by talking with him, we decided to be involved with land as well. So I think that this kind of events and this kind of talks can help, spread the word and kickstart like something really interesting. I have to say that you also need to be lucky as us in terms of practice to be able to do research and to do these kind of things, because sometimes it's very tough to be able to carry on these activities because of sponsorship, because of some other things that are not like aligning to your wills. And yeah, I think that like spreading the culture is the only way to actually doing like promoting change and making things happening. I don't know if anyone can like add something.
I think another thing that's worth considering is the size of this project. So we were all very excited to do this and coming from different backgrounds. But then when it came down to it, the reality is we all have a million other projects that we're working on, of course, that always that take most of our time. So one of our main goals of this project was to keep it short, keep it concise. Like it's a booklet. It has like specific points, very clear, very to the point. We even had like a very short word limit for every contribution, so that we just, open up like a quick win. So we just open up the field for this type of discussion. And from it, even just today, from this discussion, we, at least me, I'm already thinking of so many other things that could be added and could be. So I guess my answer would be just to, organize a short, fruitful kind of collaboration. And then from that, further on, it could develop into something else. It could take a more practical rather than conceptual approach. But yeah, I think this helps a lot getting this book out.
Yeah, I just add that we actually wanted to work together, not only because we need each other to face the challenges of today's society, but also because at least I speak for our experience, we cannot afford to work alone anymore. So we need to collaborate, and to make innovation, you need to collaborate. There is for sure someone else that is doing things better than you in the market. So just if you collaborate with the best ones, you bring a much better product, a much better research. So I see it in this way. I mean, the era of monothematic and monodisciplinary dominions, it's over.
Yes, and if I can add, when we had the meeting online, when they presented me this book, I actually mentioned that this collaboration was part of the SDGs framework addressing SDG 17, partnerships for the goals, which is probably underestimated as a goal, but it's actually key goal for all these different challenges, because the Sustainable Development Goals is in the Agenda 2030 is an action-oriented document, and SDG 17, Partnership for the Goals, means that stakeholders are supposed to come together and develop that capacity that comes from a multidisciplinarity. I would say also transdisciplinarity, so that what we design is really, addressing real challenges, because it is able to have this very complex approach with a clear mindset on how to solve some of the issues. Designers are called to provide solutions, right? I mean, for public space, it's difficult, as we said. I think now it's clear after this discussion. But at least the way we also create the process related to designing better public spaces, it is included in that SDG 17, because there is a famous scholar, Don Mitchell, that says that public space is a process. And design is part of the process. But overall, there is something that you must address before design and after design. for what you said, avoiding over design, avoiding constraints. Public space must be open, dynamic. So I think that this idea of coming together, even myself, that I didn't write the book, but I was happy to contribute with this preface. It is a way also to exchange knowledge, know more about each other, and learn from each other, because this is an ongoing activity. We always learn. So that's why it is very important to get to know who is in charge. Who is in charge? Come on! Us! After all this meeting, who is in charge? Yes, we are in charge. That's very important. Sorry, I keep pushing you. But no, I would encourage you to read the book, which is also online if you don't get a copy here, but it's online. Spread the news. And I agree, we should present this book again in other opportunities with the international scholars. I actually invited them to come to Bologna, and this is an invitation also for you to come to the public space, the Museo Spazio Pubblico, Public Space Museum, because we are hosting a workshop in September, which is the first in-presence workshop of our brand new project, the Public Space Academy, because we are designing a program for educating new generations of designers, community leaders, and urban thinkers to start thinking about cities from public space. And it's free. Okay, so I don't know if we want to close now, because I see they are already drinking, so maybe we should go.
Yeah.